Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. Today, we are going to talk about cyber threat intelligence. Cyber threat intelligence plays a vital role in today's world. As we all know, attackers are becoming smarter these days with better infrastructure and capabilities. Threats are more prevalent in nature, and threat landscape is evolving day by day. With all these factors in mind, organizations have started realizing the value of threat intelligence and made their way to set up their own threat intel team. Uh, Before we dive into today's session, let me introduce myself. I am Himanshu Sehgal. My day job is with one of the multinational company as a operation manager for SOC. I have over 13 years of industry experience with multiple domain expertise. And in my current role, I am leading a team of over 60 people. I've also delivered multiple security related sessions in open source communities and colleges. Uh, Let's get back to our today's topic. Before that, let me share my screen. That's a quick intro about me. So, what is cyber threat intelligence? Before we talk about what is cyber threat intelligence, let's talk about few of the key terms used in the security world. The first one is the threat. A threat is an event or an action that can impact the confidentiality, availability, or integrity of a resource, or we can also say it's a potential danger to an organization which can impact the organization by uh, creating damage to any of the information. Vulnerability is a weakness in the security system. It can be a loophole in the by which an attacker can get into the system. Threat actors are the adversaries, attackers, or crackers who plans for the attack. IOCs are the indicator of compromise. It can be known bad URL, IP address, domain name, or hashes. IOA is the indicator of attack. It is basically understanding the intention of the attack rather than what malware or infrastructure is used by the adversary. Then we have targets. Targets are the victims who are being attacked, who are being targeted for the attack. Now, let's talk about what is cyber threat intelligence. In a nutshell, we can say cyber threat intelligence is more of gathering information about the threat, strategizing the defense against them, and understanding more details about the threats, like what tools the attacker is using, what is the infrastructure, what malware is being used. Now let's talk about how we can set up a threat intel program in an organization. So an organization can have a threat intel team set up where an analyst can continuously monitor for the real-time threats from internally or externally. From external sources, he can gather details like feeds from cybersecurity vendors, open source threat intelligence, or ISECs, which are providing industry specific feeds, or some threat researchers, government institutions like USCERT, OSCERT, Homeland Security, NSA, etc. And once the information is gathered, it is first normalized, uh, converted into the readable format. Then it is contextualized by providing the severity to the threat, or understanding what industry it is impacting, and also what actions are required for that particular threat. Once this information is prepared, it is sent to the multiple parties for action. It can be a detection and response team. Under detection response, it can be the SIEM team, threat monitoring team, or vulnerability management team. Also, this information can be passed on to the leadership or the decision maker team, who can evaluate the risk and do a strategic planning of the cybersecurity budget. Let's talk about the types of cyber threat intelligence. There are three types of cyber threat intelligence. First is the tactical threat intelligence. So, tactical threat intelligence specifies the actions being taken to defend against an attack. It's more technical in nature. It identifies simple indicators of compromise like known bad IP addresses, URL, file hashes, and malicious domains, etc. It's focused on immediate future and has a very short lifespan because IOCs such as malicious IP address or domain name can become obsolete in even days or even hours. And security products can ingest it through feeds or API integration. Next, we have operational threat intelligence. It's more of a assessment being done against the operating environment to identify potential threats. It's more of understanding the who, why, and how about the attack. Who are the adversaries? Why is the intention or motivation behind the attack? How is the TTP is used by the attacker? TTP is tactic, technique, and procedure used by the adversary to perform the attack. As machines cannot perform the operational threat intelligence, so human analysis is required to convert the data into consumable format. These type of threat intelligence has a longer lifespan, in the sense adversaries cannot change their TTPs that easily as they can change their tools like the malware or the infrastructure. Uh, Also, the operational threat intelligence is most useful for SOC professionals responsible for performing day-to-day operations. Other consumers for this type of threat intelligence is the disciplines like vulnerability management, threat monitoring teams, or incident response teams. Third type of threat intelligence is the strategic threat intelligence. Uh, this is typically meant for the non-technical audience like leadership or the decision makers, etc. It requires senior leadership to understand the risk posed by the threat to the organization, which can further help them in taking a decision on the cybersecurity investment done for the organization. So these type of intelligence comes in the form of reports. Threat intelligence classification. Threats are usually classified into three types: unknown, unknown, known, unknown, known, known. So unknown, unknown are the threats that we are unaware and we don't know what action or defense needs to be uh, placed to protect against them. Known unknowns are the threats that we know, but we don't fully understand them, how they work, and what are the intention behind those attacks. Known knowns are the threats that we know and we fully understand them. Our understanding can be used to protect the right defense to protect against those threats. The role of an threat intelligence analyst is not to implement or defend against the threats, but to gather more and more threat information and pass it on to the defender teams for action. So the goal for a threat analyst is to move our organization structure or organization threat posture from unknown unknown to known known, or ultimately we can say the goal is to move from reactive to predictive or more proactive approach. So, how do we implement threat intelligence for an organization? On a high level, if we see, there are three major steps involved in implementing threat intelligence. First is we need to understand why we need threat intelligence, what are the crown jewels that we are protecting, and what type of threat intelligence do we need to gather. Then second phase will be how do we gather and process the required threat intelligence. Threat intelligence can be gathered from multiple sources like feeds from cybersecurity vendors, logs, or metadata from security or network devices in the organization, etc. Once we are done with the two steps, the last step will be to make it actionable. To make it actionable, we need to first identify right people who can make use of this threat intelligence information. We need to circulate the collected information to them to take the appropriate action timely. The bottom line to understand here is that 80% of the threat intelligence is gathered internally and 20% is external threat intelligence. Threat intelligence life cycle. There are six phases in the life cycle of a threat intelligence, starting with the planning phase. In the planning phase, we basically identify the crown jewels of the organization that needs to be protected. In this phase, we can identify the assets, we can provide the priority to the assets, understand the threat landscape and type of intelligence that is required to uh, address them. And second phase will be the collection phase. It's more of gathering information to build our threat intelligence. Information can be in the form of logs and metadata from servers or security devices. It can be threat feeds from cybersecurity vendors, open and dark web, etc. Uh, Next will be the processing phase. It's more of transforming the collected data into consumable format, like importing the data into other tools like SIEM, EDR, etc. Uh, Next will be the analysis phase. Uh, in analysis phase, it's a human process of turning the processed information into intelligence based on the target recipients who will be consuming the threat intelligence to identify the business impact and take action accordingly. Depending on the situation, the decision can be blocking the threat or investing in the cybersecurity of the organization. Next would be the dissemination phase, wherein the mm, threat intelligence will be circulated with the teams or the recipients who can benefit from this. It can be the teams could be SOC team, leadership, decision makers, client partners, etc., who can take right action at the right time. Last step in the life cycle will be the feedback. It's very important and critical phase wherein we need to understand the requirement from the consumers of the threat intelligence, whether the right information is reaching out to them. In case they need some modification to the information, we can do that based on the feedbacks. Or we can, in nutshell, we can say it's a constant process to ensure proper information is reaching to the intended audience in appropriate format. So let's quickly glance on what we read in each phase: planning, collection, processing, analysis, dissemination, feedback. Now, sources of threat intelligence. As I mentioned in my earlier slide, that threat intelligence sources can be internal or it can also be external. In internal sources, it can be logs, metadata, networks, endpoints, SIEM, and many more. From external, it can be cybersecurity vendors, government institutions like UCERT, OSCERT, NSA, or Homeland Security. Uh, we can also have open source threat feeds, ISEX, which provides industry specific threat feeds, etc. So let me call out that the ones which are mentioned in the slide are not restricted. We can have other sources of threat intelligence internally as well as externally. Now, indicators of compromise. Uh, as I spoke in my earlier slides about indicator of compromise, it can be anything that can detect the action of an attacker. So I've listed few of them. Maybe from different areas we can find it out. Operating system, we can have registry keys, file names, file hashes, DLLs. From network side, we can have IP address, URLs, domain names. From email gateway, we can have email address, email subject, links, attachments. From endpoints, we can have hash values. So these are the indicators of compromise which help us understand if any action is being taken by the attacker. So again, let me mention here that these are not the restricted what I mentioned on the slide. There can be many more indicators which we can look for while investigating for an attack. Let's talk about pyramid of pain. And pyramid of pain, each level of the pyramid represents different types of attack indicators an analyst must look for while investigating for an attack activity. And this pyramid of pain is broken down into the difficulty level, which we can see on the screen against each indicator. So what does that mean? It means that if you're able to deny any of these indicator, the difficulty level shows that how much pain we can give an attacker to get into the system. For example, hash values are something which is very easy for an attacker to modify to create by modifying the file, and TTPs are something which is very difficult for us to identify. But in case we are able to identify and block the TTPs for of an attacker, it will be very tough for an attacker to get into the system. Let's now talk about a few of the threat intelligence framework. The first one is the cyber kill chain process or the framework. In cyber kill chain framework, it's a high level framework that breaks down the attack into 7 phases based on activities performed by an attacker. The first phase is the reconnaissance phase, wherein the attacker will be probing for the vulnerability or the weakness in the system, such as harvesting login credentials for phishing, identifying open ports by initiating port scanning. Uh, Second will be the weaponization phase. It's more of creating deliverables, like the payload will be with an exploit such as backdoor typically. The third phase will be the delivery phase. It's the process of sending the payload to victims' system in the form of malicious email, links, etc. Uh, then we have exploit phase. In exploit phase, the malicious code will be executed on the target system. Then we have installation phase. In the installation phase, the malware will be installed on the user machine. And then we have command and control. It's more of creating a channel or persistence for the attacker to take control of the remote system. Last step will be the actions. It's in actions. Basically, the attacker will be carrying out the intended goal, like encrypting the data, exfiltration of data, and so on. The point to note here is, if we understand the phase of attack using the cyber kill chain process, we can always go back and check our controls to identify why the attack wasn't detected in the earlier phase of the cyber kill chain process. It could be due to missing control to detect an attack, or it could be a miss from an analyst. So it's a very useful framework for the operations team to understand the activity of an adversary, and also it can help bringing the maturity to the incident monitoring and response teams. Now let's talk about the diamond model. So a diamond model is a complementary model to the cyber kill chain process. It was designed to track attacker group over the time rather than individual attack. Using diamond model, we can perform in-depth analysis of an attack by mapping the attack to 4 interconnected elements like adversary, capability, infrastructure, and victim. So if we look at the figure below, we can see that we have mapped our attack to 4 different mm, interconnected elements. Adversary is the attacker. It can be a hacktivist, cyber criminal, state-sponsored APT, insider threats, etc. Uh, Capability is the TTP, or the tactics, techniques, and procedure used by the attacker. Maybe they're using malware, exploit, any specific tool, or some stolen certificate, etc. Then we have infrastructure. Infrastructure defines what infrastructure is an attacker is holding. Maybe an attacker has an IP address or a domain listed on his name, email address on his name, or some specific tools or technologies. Then we have a victim. Victim is a person whose system is being attacked. So by mapping the attack to diamond model with all the available details and adding intelligence, we can identify if it was random or targeted attack for a specific user, like a VIP or a user from finance department, etc. Now let's talk about the MITRE attack framework. MITRE attack basically talks about the TTPs, tactic, technique, and procedure that attacker will go through to perform an attack. There are 12 tactics at the top of the MITRE framework that represents the column and defines high-level objective of the attacker. Within each column, there are multiple techniques that an attacker can use. It is represented by the cells, and individual techniques are further broken down into very nice different sets of data, like a description of what an attacker will be doing in the specific technique, steps to detect and mitigate the specific technique. Also, along with these details, we can it will provide us what platforms an attacker can use and what data sources we need to protect or monitor this the particular technique. If you see on the screen, the tactics basically talks about the why part of the attack. Why is the intention behind the attack? What is the intention or the motive of the attacker to perform this attack? How talks about the techniques. Or techniques is basically the how the attack will be performed. Then we have procedures. What all steps the attacker will be following to perform this attack. As so, there are overall 12 techniques and 330 techniques as listed on the screen. This is a quick snapshot of the MITRE tool available on the GitHub. It's a free tool. As we can see on the top, there are we can see the list of thread groups available and the software. So if we know what who's the attacker, what group he belongs to, we can come back to the MITRE matrix. We can select and see what all techniques an attacker can perform to launch an attack. These are the list of APT groups just for reference. Now, threat for next generation SOC. So for next generation SOC, obviously the very first thing that we can say is the MITRE framework, as it totally depends on the. It talks about the TTPs, tactic, technique, and procedures. Uh, so yes, MITRE metrics is something that we should think of, and we should migrate everything based on the MITRE. So as we discussed that MITRE basically talks about TTPs, observed TTPs that an attacker will be using to perform an attack. Uh, it also gives us the group of the threat actors available in the form of adversaries. Then we have it also provide us MITRE also provide us softwares, the list of softwares that an attacker can use. Then pre-attack is basically the first two phases of the cyber kill chain: reconnaissance and weaponization. Based on that, we have certain techniques defined. If in case an organization follow those, uh, they can protect the attack from happening. So it's a kind of proactive approach that an organization can think of taking. Sticks and taxi are two different formats. Uh, Taxi is trusted automated exchange of intelligence information. It's a transport protocol that allows sharing of threat intelligence information over HTTPS via API. Its sticks is structured threat information expression, standard for it's a standard format for presenting threat intelligence information. CAR is Cyber Analytics Repository. It's basically a knowledge base developed by MITRE that can be referred. This is completely my perspective, what all things I feel that we should follow to move to migrate from the existing SOC to the next generation SOC. Let's discuss on those. The first one is uh, focus more on quality than quantity in terms of people, process, and technology. We should train our people to have better understanding on security and threat. All existing processes should be reviewed and improved. Invest on technology that best fit the organization's need rather than getting influenced by others. Then we have automating standard tasks or use cases. Identify all such tasks that can be automated. It will reduce the unwanted efforts and better incident and response for an organization. Shift from reactive to proactive approach. We should focus on preventing the attack at first place rather than detecting and remediating them. This is the need of the hour, considering the attackers are well equipped these days. Focus more on IOA instead IOC. We should understand the intention of the attacker rather than relying on legacy process of identifying and blocking the ICs. Blocking ICs are 90% worthless as they become obsolete in days or sometimes in hours after the attacker performs an intended code. Most of the time, ICs are just an overhead for the network, which impacts the overall network performance. Then we have use of EDR instead of standard endpoint protection. EDR is endpoint detection and response, as EDRs are well equipped these days to take action in the real time. It's recommended to migrate to EDR from the standard endpoint protection. Reduce infrastructure overload by shifting to cloud wherever possible. We should identify assets that utilize more resource and efforts to manage and can be cheaper if migrated to cloud. Uh, this will reduce the resource management cost and security analysts can focus on more on delivering the quality work. So let me reiterate, these are completely my perspective. Maybe the views can change from person to person. So you can think of these things. These are few of the references that you can go through. You can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or email. If you need any advice, I'll be glad to assist you. Thank you. I think the session was informative, and thank you so much for joining the session today.